All right, so this is the December 13th meeting of the Resource Management Working Group. Got a number of items on the agenda. I believe you put a number of these there, if I'm not mistaken. So in the interest of time, let's go through each of these items one by one. So do you want to go through the V110 work plan topic, Fish?
Yeah, sure. I just want to make sure if someone is taking notes. Is anyone volunteering to take notes, or I do it?
I can volunteer. This is Balaji.
Oh, thank you, Balaji. Awesome. So, I mean, I had a few thoughts in my mind, but like before I go on about them, I wanted to understand what is it that as a group we are considering achieving in the 110 time frame. I just want us to be cognizant of the fact that even though we have a lot more people in the community now focusing on this area, the review bandwidth is like pretty limited, and the churn rate also needs to be limited. So we need to like figure out some form of balance between graduating existing features and stabilizing them versus adding new things. And so let's spend like the next 10 or 15 minutes together identifying priorities for all of us, and then seeing how we can sort of like place them in the 110 time frame.
So if I was to maybe kick off the discussion, then Vish, if I said that, like, from my perspective, I think at least representing Red Hat in the community here, that we would like to see device plugins be able to move to beta in 110, the basic CPU pinning support that Red Hat and Intel's been collaborating on, would like to see them move to beta in 110. And then the huge pages work that at least we've validated with a lot of exhaustive QE on the Red Hat side, I see no reason why that can't move to 110. From Red Hat itself, I'm not interested in driving a ton of new features in the 110 timeframe versus finishing up what we've started. So I'm not sure how others in the community feel, but that's kind of where we're coming from at this point.
Okay. I can probably like plus one most of that from the Google side. I think our main priority now is to graduate device plugins to beta. And also like continue focusing on graduating all the other existing experimental features because we have had them for a while. And I think like it's through the stack, and that like we have added a few experimental for like memory controls and so on. So like trying to spend energy on graduating them would be the topmost priority. And secondly, I would like to start collecting use cases for better resource APIs, not necessarily like finalize the design, but just at least have a sketch of like what are the different scenarios that we are trying to cover, and maybe have like a few high-level ideas that are circulated in the community, and that's about it, right? I guess it's not about finalizing, or it's not about like deciding the execution plan and so on. Like, those are the main things from our side, at least.
I think we may want to set it as a stretch goal, sketch goal that we want to have agreed on overall design on resource class API, and hopefully we can come up with some execution plan.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a sketch goal. I just feel like if we can set it as a goal, that will help people to prioritize the work.
So I'm just on the resource class front. Like, I'm curious if I was to gauge where the community of folks here are, and like, from my perspective, I still feel like we have work to do to make it easy to operationalize like a homogeneous set of clusters or nodes. That some of the advantages around resource classes and getting heterogeneous support are at least more forward-looking for me. So like, is this something that's a near-term like production concern for folks, that having it be anything beyond a stretch goal would be like a major detriment?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. That like we want to make progress on that. At the same time, like that's not the topmost priority. So if you had to like actually prioritize it, I would probably say it's like a P2, given like P0 is something that we have to definitely do. Jai, does that align with your thoughts?
I think whether we put it P1 or P2, let's try to make some progress. And I mean, if we fail, no one will really come to us and try to blame. I don't think that will be the situation. But I think I agree with Derek that we may want to put some time, put more time on this. Definitely graduating the existing features to beta, I think it's always high priority, but like we may also want to plan to put some time on this effort as well. At least on my side, I think I may try to spend some time on this.
Yeah, it sounds good. The only repercussion to be aware of is that like most of the reviewers or approvers who would definitely want to be stakeholders on this project might not have cycles to come to some consensus in the 110 time frame. I think that's what we are trying to communicate by saying it's a stretch goal. As long as like that's okay, then by all means we should continue making progress.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Especially like I think this feature touches both node side and scheduler side.
Right, and auto scaling and
yeah, auto scaling, auto provisioning.
Right. So yeah, so there's one more thing that I forgot to mention. I would also like to see in the 110 time frame enabling consumption of NVIDIA GPUs in a really easy manner with Minikube and like other local cluster scenarios without users having to go through a lot of pain. I don't know if that's a common interest for people, but like at least with the Kubeflow project that we announced recently, I mean, this has come as a very strong signal and feedback from people trying it out. So I'd like to like make some progress in that area, but it should mostly be out of free.
So I'm sorry, Vish, the audio broke up on my end. Did you say Minikube?
Yeah, I was saying Minikube. I mean, what I meant to say with Minikube was that the most common Kubernetes solutions, deployment solutions, they support NVIDIA GPUs without too much of friction. Right, like that's the goal.
I think it should be Kubernetes.
Well, yeah. See, it's a little bit complicated in that like kubeadmin is expected to just be the core kernel which deploys like the core and then like the new like in Brian's language the nucleus and then like just one layer above it, which is absolutely necessary for any sort of Kubernetes deployment to function. It is not meant to be a full-fledged, fully user-friendly Kubernetes deployment. So, so let's not even get to like what is the right abstraction for expressing that. Maybe this is not the right forum for that. But yeah, we definitely have to identify what's the least common denominator for focusing our energy.
From Intel, we'd like to help with a design for NUMA. Just something minimally, just making the CPU manager and the device plugins agree on NUMA affinity. And so, in addition to that, all of the graduations that Derek mentioned.
Is that something you just want to write design for, or are you expecting like an alpha code proof point? Because I guess the one thing I have is like if we're trying to graduate what we have now, I don't want to have to do like a ton of free factoring.
Right, just design for 110.
Okay.
Unless we magically get done with everything.
I actually have a point to make there, and it might not be the right thing, but I still want to like discuss this. Which we already have AutoNuma, and so I want to understand what level of performance gains we would actually get by trying to pin to a specific NUMA node. And like say if we didn't have static CPU pinning and NUMA, and if you still did device allocation, I mean the device allocation by itself will have its own its own like hardware locality issues. But I want to understand the performance impact of like all of these different features and their combinations. So my gut feeling is like maybe we first invest time on building some good real world performance benchmarks. Because the synthetic ones we can like set them up such that we will see performance differences, but does it actually matter to use this? And that way we can give them specific guidance or white papers on how to consume Kubernetes, right? So before we even like invest more energy in like identifying more of these features and setting them up in specific policies, I would like to see some benchmarks available in Kubernetes where maybe we start with just a few workloads, and then we can open it up to the community where they can contribute a bunch more. I see this discussion happening in the sig-scale and sig testing area as well. I tried to forward a design doc for that to our working group in this. And Google has invested in something called as PerfKit benchmarker, which is also open source. So there's like basically a lot of things that we can leverage today, and it's just about like setting up the right infrastructure for us to get that data, probably across different environments.
So maybe we should make some standard performance benchmark as a separate goal, not under NUMA, because I also think this is something maybe we would like to say, and I hope the benchmark is not just limited to NUMA, although maybe NUMA will be the first feature that we may use to evaluate.
Yeah, that.
Why do we have to have this to gate it? I mean, it's a well understood thing. There's piles of benchmarks.
So Jeremy, like my question is like, what if we just enable AutoNuma and then just take care of
AutoNuma doesn't account for PCI locality. That is its fatal flaw.
Yeah, I was just going to say that like, what if we just do device scheduling without taking care of NUMA, and then just let AutoNuma deal with that? Like, what would
I'm telling you, it won't schedule the threads on the local node. AutoNuma handles page faulting, so it handles memory and task, not PCI locality.
Sure, and I'm saying that if we had just CPU pinning, and if we chose the right devices based on the CPUs we picked, or the other way around, for example, then and if we had AutoNuma enabled, what level of tail latency are we looking at? Is it even?
So I guess that's what I was trying to differentiate. So Connor said one thing, which was he wanted to get locality decisions made relative to the pinning CPU choice. I can't tell, Vish, if you're saying you don't want to do that and just depend on AutoNuma alone, but I feel like we do need to get that aligned.
Yeah, so my thought process is there's typically like more CPU cores than the other external PCI hardware devices. So
Correct.
we probably go with the hardware devices as like higher priority or higher weight, and then choose the rest based on that, just because of like how machines are typically set up. But again, this is getting into the details where like we don't have any proper data to verify where the performance level is today and what the tail latency is. Like I think the Intel folks did some work around what is it, Swan or something, which tries to benchmark this. Like I would like to see that become part of the Kubernetes community, so we have some data on top of which we add these features, because we've mentioned this quite a few times, but we never made progress in that area.
For CPU manager, there's a pending task of coming up with some performance benchmark to show the benefit of the static CPU manager. So I think that will be a very interesting work if we can get some progress on that and have some result.
Balaji, you did some work on that already, didn't you? Like we could maybe upstream.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working on it, but it's been on the back burner. But we can resurrect it, and I can publish some results along with the code, and maybe in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
So Huawei and like and a few other people from like sig scaling and sig testing are trying to do something similar. So we should just see if we can have like single abstraction layer for running these kind of benchmarks, because otherwise we'll have to go build all of it, which is probably not that interesting for us. So maybe we need to like engage with those SIGs and find out what is the working group that is working on just real world benchmarking. And maybe we have a few tests that are specific to our features.
Well, especially when it comes to co-location, right? Because I guess that this would pretty much be like from end to end, or how fast or how much, versus what happens when more than one thing is running at a time.
Right. I agree. And I mean, we all know that we have to implement a whole bunch of features, and based on experience, but it's just that it's sort of hard to say what sort of applications we're targeting and like what is the actual end user benefit for that. And like now I can't tell people if they have to turn on one or turn off one.
So I kind of feel like it seems like for the initial set of items we talked about, like if we want to scope today's discussion, like I didn't hear any rampant disagreement of let's work towards graduating what we've had thus far. At best, we're kind of now like prejudging any design thoughts that Connor might put out, right? Which is a bit premature, I guess. So like as a community, like I'm not saying we should commit to doing anything with NUMA at a code standpoint in 110. I believe you're saying the same. I think it's fair for Connor to go do the benchmarking or work with Bala to talk about the motivation for the next step of the design. But like at this point, I feel like we're arguing things that are more 3 months out instead of, January.
Yeah, I totally agree. I might have ended up rambling, but all I was trying to say is like, I would like to make some progress on developing benchmarking tools to evaluate features that we want to implement.
I think it makes a lot of sense, especially as we try to optimize in multiple dimensions. Identifying regressions is going to get less and less trivial as we add more things under management. So, point taken.
Okay. Any volunteers for leading that?
We did try to kick this off, like Jeremy and Christopher and I at some point. We can maybe look at what we got scribbled down back then, and Maciej Winowski was also a part of that. You probably pick it up again and see where we left it.
I can also help with this.
One benchmark that's still great. Sorry, Balaji, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I can also help with this if there is interest. I'm working with some synthetic benchmarks, but if we can upgrade that to real-world workloads or typical workloads.
The real-world benchmark thing is significant effort. If we block on the inclusion of that, we're going to be waiting for a long time. One potential suggestion is Pharonics or PerfKit benchmarker. This will probably be a lot easier to integrate and a lot less debate about what gets run. A lot simpler. I think our team even has some experience with both of those, but I just don't know if we can commit to integrating them in 110.
PerfKit benchmarker is just a collection of benchmarks that exist, right? Like for Cassandra, like the YSCSB and CPU spec and whatnot. But I hope they can grow in parallel, right? Because some things won't work unless we have NUMA awareness, like with huge pages. Isn't that right? Some things are just like inherently, if you get to like many socket systems, won't be a great experience.
So on the Google side, like I had some of the teams that are maintaining PerfKit benchmarker actually add benchmarks with TensorFlow, where we like do random device allocations and try to measure standard deviation in terms of performance. So I mean, all those benchmarks, I would expect them to be upstream. So I would consider it to be less technical work to get that running in a pod, and then just running a lot of them and like storing the data in Prometheus or something like that. I'm saying that since there is an effort already happening for having a framework for running real world benchmarks, maybe we can have that group of people focus on that, and we can just bring in some specific workloads that we think are good indicators of performance. Jeremy, that's like to address your concern of like this might just take forever. I'm saying that maybe we can work towards a simple MVP, which is not what we would ideally like, but at least it's still giving us some data, some actionable data.
So the PerfKit benchmarker was brought up in that document. I'm not against that at all. It's just the fullness of that document was, well, it was ambitious. I would say necessary. Quite honestly, we pitched a giant proposal to SigScale like a year and a half ago. That was a real, what we called it, kitchen sink. And it just didn't, we never staffed it. So I was glad to see someone else in the community bring this up again, if they can actually staff it.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely needs like 1 or 2 people who would work for at least a month or 2 to at least get something going. Because once we have, what I've noticed is like, once we have these frameworks, the people usually like end up adding more and more benchmarks and more tests. It's that initial inertia of like building that framework. That is what is typically, that's the thing that typically takes more time.
Well, I know we can ask around. We probably can't commit anything in this meeting.
Okay. Okay, so we can do that a nice to have, and probably tackle it if we have owners volunteer themselves.
So wasn't it just about just the design proposal being out for the NUMA? Did I hear that wrong? I thought we were never discussing about the execution of NUMA.
Yeah,
Like
personally, I have no qualms if people want to write proposals and argue in the content of a proposal why the feature is valuable, right? Like but I'm not setting any expectation that like in a 110 time frame, any approver of said proposal will have time to review it and keep up with it, right? So as long as the author is aware of the bandwidth demands on the reader, and I think we're kind of communicating that pretty clearly here now, that like, yeah, people, if they have time and energy to want to invest in research, like let's get that done. What I'm most concerned on right now is like if we look to what we have to like allocate people time to in 110, like if we can just make sure that for the feature sets that we described now that we want to graduate, that we have a clear owner, approver, reviewer pairings, that's probably the best thing we can do, and we can handle that offline if we want because there's other topics on the agenda. But if Intel wants to go and write proposals, I mean, I've written thousands of proposals that never merged, but each one I learned something, right? So it's okay.
So where are the roadmaps being stored? Is it in the same spreadsheet from last?
No, I feel like from 110 we should probably start moving that to a community file, like some README file. Maybe you could just create a file within the working group directory in the Kubernetes community repository. Derek, what do you think?
Yeah, I have the to do this, and I've been really delinquent, but I will do that before the new year. So we can then handle that via pull request afterwards. So I think it seems like we have general consensus in the near term for 110, the areas that we want to close out with some stretch goals of maybe iterating more on a resource class design and maybe throwing more thoughts out to the community around a co-locality design with CPUs and devices. To move on to the next item on the agenda, do we have, there was a next item on here around discussing cluster scope resources, or actually I think Jeremy, you had an item on here to give a rundown of the KubeCon meeting.
Well, I had it, but if everyone on the phone was there, then or attending remotely, then I don't need to go into it again. I would say that there was a lot of good scheduling talk there. I mean, there's like Cube Arbitrator. I learned about that. But anyway, I can't see who's on the call, so I guess I'll just assume that folks have a good sense of what's discussed there.
Jeremy, can you go over if there were any requirements from the community that were brought up in relation to the roadmap or anything? Any changes that people were looking for?
I tell you what, the one thing I kind of heard loud and clear was capacity management, capacity planning. That was the one thing. And then the other one was like, although it was probably heavily biased, one of the gentlemen from Intel was there talking about FPGAs. We keep hearing about that, especially since Amazon is selling them. So that was the other thing that came up requirements-wise. And I quite honestly, I think everybody is waiting for us to get the device plugin and user story around GPUs nailed down. It has to get buttoned up, nailed down, you know what I mean? Have a useful user story cross distro preferably, or cross platform preferably anyway, story around those.
There was one more thing, which is like resource sharing across namespaces, especially like if you have a large set of resources and if you have different people like coding or and like how do you improve utilization? I think there was a project called Cube Arbitrator, but like trying to make that more upstream and like trying to make it more relevant. Like there was another discussion going on that.
For capacity management, is it related to resource quota or it's something different?
The arbitrator works on top of that. Our early discussions on it wanted to do it through quota, but we talked through that challenge.
It's
Okay.
one part of it.
So,
quota is
so here's the thing. Sorry.
Jeremy, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to elaborate a little bit more around capacity planning. So our team has been digging pretty deeply into the Prometheus metrics that are currently available. There's some giant gaps as to being able to make sense of what's running in a cluster and how busy your cluster is. So I think over the next couple of sprints on Red Hat side, we're gonna poke there quite a bit actually to help and see how to build useful Prometheus queries that tell you, eventually to ultimately like inform cluster auto scaling, but really even short term just to figure out cost efficiency, potential changes for cost efficiency, et cetera. Where this started, guys, was where the heck do we set cube reserved? And what do we set system reserved to? And we started looking into, it's really difficult to answer this at cluster scale right now given the existing metrics. So on our side, while I'm not exactly sure where the changes will go, but that's how I was attempting to address this. It's a big concern internally as well.
So does that mean we may want to add more monitoring sig-node metrics throughout the Kubernetes, or you think maybe there are some other ways to address this problem?
Yes, I mean I think we'll prototype with a plugin, either a node exporter plugin or even just a Prometheus, additional Prometheus scraping endpoint. And then we'll see if it's worth upstreaming. My opinion is this is pretty generic stuff that anyone who's building capacity planning systems would want.
So personally, I think this discussion should probably, if we're talking about like reservations on a node and stuff, that's probably something we should drive through sig-node more proper. And as you know, Jeremy, our observations are that couples a lot of things. Like we've had large numbers of services destroy our CPUs as well. So were there any other topics we wanted to come out of from the KubeCon meetings, or do we want to go and is someone here that wanted to talk through the cluster scope resources discussion?
The only other thing that I want to say with the meeting was that for folks who were not able to see the room was packed. There are people literally standing. So there's so much of expectations and interest in this area in the community.
I saw Jeremy's picture, and I can attest to trying to listen remotely. It was hard because it seemed like it was a big room that was full of people. So that's great. So do we want to go through the next topic on cluster scope resources?
Is the author here? I don't know who added the entry item.
I do not hear an author, so I would say let's move on to the next topic here, which was one I'm interested in talking through more, which was, so at the end of 1.9, we've had the very good discussion around like graduating plugins. I don't know, Vish, if you want to give an update now on 1.10 and how we can get over the hump that we felt in 1.9.
Yeah, so Jang has a plan on what we should do around device plugins specifically to graduate it to beta. At a high level, I just feel like I was telling this to Jeremy at KubeCon too, and that like we need a few more implementations. So maybe like trying to have a prototype of FPGA integration working, and maybe if you can get Vikas to complete a solar flare integration, like those are things that will really be beneficial when we are having this conversation of graduating the API.
So for solar flare, we did try to pursue that, right? And then we've basically kind of halted that, right? So absent like revisiting that original discussion on what we pass in through the device plugin, I kind of think that, at least that from my perspective, I'm not really motivated in continuing to push that if we're not going to get any traction.
So I'm thinking that let's continue having traction there, because the thing is, I want to see these use cases actually work, and if the API has to change for those use cases, let's make those changes before we go to beta.
But pretty clearly, there was pushback on trying to use this as a way to handle anything around networking, correct?
So I think on the networking side, I hope like they can use the CNI, because that is the protocol used for network extension. And I just feel like sending the whole pod spec or any like pod specific information to plug in may open the door that with more fragmented implementation in the future.
So this is our opinion, but like, can we have this conversation with some of the networking people who are like specializing just on CNI, and at least like try to come to an overall community consensus on this in the 110 timeframe? Derek, like, is that something where you would be interested in participating?
I guess I don't want to waste our own engineering time on devices that might be outside of the comfort area of this group versus devices that we think would help us demonstrate device plugins can satisfy more than one device type. Because like personally right now, device plugins is very clearly a hardware accelerator plugin model, and even then not yet satisfying the monitoring side generically. So we have to choose what the other one's going to be, right? If we're getting a lot of interest from FPGAs, like I'm not sure if at Red Hat we can staff that this upcoming quarter. But like I'd like to know like what is the other device type that we think would be reasonably covered by the existing surface area so that we can graduate it.
In both InfiniBand and any sort of like high performance NIC, they seem to naturally fit in here. The only thing is like there hasn't been a proper conversation around what is the demarcating line between CNI and this sort of plugins. So I think that maybe as part of beta, we should probably answer that question, right? Like whether we end up having the right set of plugins or not, like that's probably less interesting for me, in that like if the plugin is not complete, it's okay. But I just want to understand those high level details on like what is the scope and like how do these plugins interact.
So I know Jeremy is pushing some other work around multi-network support via other angles. I don't know, Jeremy, what your appetite here is with respect to.
Yeah, so that's how I spent my week last week for the most part, talking with different people. And if you're subscribed to Sig Network, you'd have seen we propose a new working group to sort this out amongst the vendors. And when in those meetings, I made sure they understood that there's an eventual intersect between the device plugin and whatever they come up with initially using CRDs. So we actually committed some engineering resources inside Red Hat to work and build prototypes in that area, along with several of the other vendors, including Intel. And that'll be, if you track Sig Network, you'll see it's coming up there. And one thing we can do when that kicks off on December 21st is bring up the concerns mentioned now around what to do in 110. I just don't know if they're going to have solid direction in the time frame where we're looking to potentially graduate things. So, but it's worth mentioning to that group.
Mm-hmm. So I want to clarify what is the goals we want to get from the. I mean, I know it's definitely help us evaluate the API design with different types of or device plugin implementations. But I also want to don't want to depend on the because since we don't really have resources, human resources allocated for any of the device plugin implementation right now, seems like no one has confirmed they will make sure in 110 time frame they will be able to report or make available a device plugin implementation. I just want to set clear goal on what we want to get from the different device plugin implementations. I think if we just want to hear feedback, and I think we already have some feedbacks from early developers on different device plugins, and maybe we can just summarize those feedbacks, and then maybe we can just ask around the folks to say whether they think the feature is ready to graduate to beta, instead of really depending on the real implementation being used in production or whatever.
I know that we want to get to a point of stability, but is there a huge hurry to graduate device plugins to beta that would preclude waiting on some of the networking features to get settled?
So, I mean, from my perspective at Red Hat, we will have very low ability to direct our customers to use a feature that's alpha. You get very little meaningful feedback. I can't comment for other vendors, but right now alpha is a big inhibitor to meaningful feedback. And
yeah, I think I also feel the same way. If we just hold the feature at the alpha stage, then we may never get enough feedback. And I know it's a commitment that we will need to support. We may need to support the different versions of API. But I just want to say, so from other people who have implemented different, who have tried to implement different device plugins, if they say some feature or some work had to be done for beta, I would like to say the particular feature request or any particular issue, instead of trying to rely on say we have to have some other device plugin implementation to graduate the feature.
So to me, the question is are there other devices that users in production or vendors in this space are looking to support in any time frame outside of GPUs? And if that's not the case, is it realistic to expect that we can meet the goal of demonstrating that device plugins can support more than one device? At Red Hat, we tried to push for the SolarFlare implementation because that would be something that would be compelling to our user community. But obviously that had met resistance. And right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, but I'm not aware of any strong impediment right now pushing us to get FPGA support in the next 3 months, right? So there is a major user need for accelerated workload types though, right? So the best I can think is we either have to we could rebrand device plugins or just be honest with ourselves that we're not having people demonstrate other devices in the right time frame, or maybe we revisit the pushback we had on the SolarFlare work. But
so the SolarFlare work was
only right now, I can't say that in 3 months. If we have to say device plugins support more than one device type or has been demonstrated to, I am hard pressed to know that at least at Red Hat, I will not have engineers that can go support that statement.
Yeah, on that note, on the Intel side, is the work on FPGA going to make any progress in the 110 timeframe? Connor,
Sasha is also on the line. But.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are planning to work on that. I'm not sure how fast we will be able to open source our plugin to be able to demonstrate it, but yeah, it's in our plans.
Then if you can demonstrate functionality and highlight the any changes that is necessary, that should be good enough, I guess, for the kind of signals we're looking for.
Yes. What I think during 110 point time we will be able to do.
Okay. So Derek, there's at least one person or a group of people that are going to spend some energy in this area.
I guess how firm of the commitment is that? I mean, there's a lot of ways we can handle this, right? But like it's if we find ourselves at the end of 110 without a clear alternative device plugin, like, I'm not sure if we continue to hold, right? Because at some point, like, where there's actual demand and need, like, that seems to be what the community has directed or realized then, right?
I would agree with you on that from my side. I mean, I've gone to at least Solarflare several times to try and convince them to spend more cycles on this. Even had some discussions earlier this week. I wouldn't say they're not willing to, because I haven't heard back yet in the 110 timeframe. The problem with our initial PR of Vicas's PR was that it touched the pod object with an annotation. It was, or not with an annotation. It touched the pod object, which kind of got a full stop from this group, deferring to the network.
It asked for the pod object to be passed to the plugin.
Didn't we annotate it with an IP address?
It didn't touch the pod object. It just asked for more data to be made available.
Yeah, I think, Derek, like as we discussed a little bit earlier, the problem is not passing the data. The problem is like clearly documenting the scope of device plugins, which is what is like a little bit murky at this point.
If we scope device plugins to FPGAs and hardware accelerators, is that sufficient scope? I mean, and I guess that's where I sense the scope or the direction of the community scope is heading towards.
But even if we're talking about like FPGA scope, we still need a bunch of additional parameters. What needs to be passed to device plugin to properly operate the device.
Maybe we can discuss them in more details, like and what's the right way to send those parameters between kubelet and the device plugin. I just feel like sending container ID or pod ID or pod spec may open the door too wide, but maybe we can discuss the particular use cases and see whether we can come up with some solution.
Yeah, we can do it later.
Yeah, sounds good. Do we have anything else in the agenda?
I think that was the last topic on today's agenda. The only other topic I want to have is I do not think we should hold any more meetings for the remainder of the year. So just a heads up on that. And then another topic I want to discuss was have people think through a little bit is right now we have a weekly cadence for this meeting. I think given what we've discussed right now for what the community interest is around 110 and where our focus would lie, like if we were to move to a bi-weekly meeting, would there be objections to that? Or, given a new year, we have some time to think if we want to do anything differently. So if people have suggestions on how we could run the group better or more efficiently or anything in that regard, please reach out to both me and Vish. But let's use the new year to do things better if possible.
Yeah, I'd like to second that in that, like, maybe you should just move to a bi-weekly cadence to begin with, unless someone objects. And we can always have like more focused meetings if a few people are collaborating on like specific items in our agenda, then they can always have their own meetings. The only request from Brian has been that like those meetings should also be documented. So it's just if you're having those ad hoc meetings, it's just like documented in our community page and continue with those meetings.
Okay. So with that, everyone have a great holiday, and I will see you on these meetings next year. And I will update our invites to go to a bi-weekly cadence and try that out to begin with 2018.
Wait a minute, I still have a topic to discuss today.
Did I miss something on the agenda?
Yeah,
yeah, it's just newly added. Yeah, topology part. It's very quick.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And I actually talked with Connor about this before, about the topology of GPUs we are using. So this is about, actually we are planning to move all the Microsoft research machine learning workload to Kubernetes. It's very big plans, but every machine learning training job actually depending on this kind of GPU topology, for example, the NVIDIA link, for example, and we have paper and benchmark to prove that this kind of acceleration can can improve the training performance to a very high level. But so the blocker we see here, actually in our environment, we cannot use device plugin at all, because the device plugin only can say I want 2 GPUs, for example. But what we want is like we want to use 2 GPUs which are connected by NVIDIA link. So it's kind of different requirement. So although we are using Kubernetes 1.9, but we cannot use device plugin. What we are doing today is that we have a CR scheme. It's very ugly because we have to copy most of the logic in device plugin and write them inside the CR scheme to do that. So what I want to discuss today is actually the topology stuff can be handled. Most of the use cases can be handled in the resource class proposal, right? For example, you can say that I want 2 GPUs which is linked together. It's kind of like a resource class proposal stuff. So I think.
So we discussed this in detail when we had a face-to-face meeting last May, I think. So you should be able to go find the notes on that. There should be exhaustive coverage on exactly this topic. It might like help you come up to speed on like what the community consensus was in last May. And then maybe we can have this conversation again after New Year's or emails or something. Because like TLDR is that like we decided not to deal with topology at the cluster level and do it at the node level. And like have kubelets sort of handle a graph and do some sort of graph scheduling. But like if you read through the nodes, you would sort of understand the rationale behind getting to that consensus. And so if you have any, like if you had missed some specific things, then you could probably like highlight just those and we could continue the conversation with that.
Yeah, but to be fair, the resource class proposal did come out of that meeting, right? And it was prototype. So if you're saying initially the idea is germinating something that you would get value out of, I guess that's good feedback. But if you haven't had a chance to read through those notes, Harry, I'd be happy to point you to them. I would ask that you actually, it's amazing how many requests I get to be able to get access to those because people don't want to join Kubernetes Dev, but that's not an issue with you, Harry.
Yes, and I also want to understand, Harry, if you have some, because I think right now I want to understand, are you interested in doing this on-prem or you are trying to use some cloud provider environment? Because I think there are certain ways to work around the problem even right now. Like say you can create some cluster with the particular, or like a group of nodes with the particular GPU device types that you already use NVLink.
Yes, we can. We did this on Azure and in many other cloud providers. I don't know the case in Google Cloud, but yes, we did that we did this on Azure. Our training job is running on Azure. Actually, it works.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is like we have an alternate proposal for how to deal with that, and we had a bunch of conversations with I know who the person was from Azure who's working. I think maybe his name was Samir or Sanjay. I don't remember.
Sanjay. He's a leading researcher there. Yeah.
Right. So we did have lots of conversations with Sanjay on why we want to do it at the node level, not at the cluster level. So. I don't know where that ended. Maybe just Sanjay went ahead and did what he thought was right. But I haven't seen that yet in upstream. So, like I was saying earlier, like I would suggest you like catch up on conversations that have happened so far. Most of them should be in like open mailing lists or docs, and then we have this conversation again. At which point, I'm hoping it becomes more of like a subject to a question of like which one is better with some facts, and less about like we need to do this, right? Like. Because the other alternative is like we spend like an hour just talking about this, which I'm happy to do, but it might be more effective for both of our or like all of our times to go just catch up on the notes that's already there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I want to learn like the particular pain points of the current way of doing this. I can say like portability is one issue, and the more automation required in the future could also be value. But I would also like to hear your thoughts, given that you have good experience on this, and yeah, just to bring us with the pain points you had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Speaking of following up, I know at KubeCon, a few people mentioned a next iteration of an in-person meeting. I was wondering if people were interested in that next year. And timeline maybe March-ish, February, or
I would be interested. I can't know on a timeline right now. When is KubeCon Europe?
It's in May.
Is it May?
Yeah.
Is it possible that we meet up at some place closer?
No, I'm just trying to think what the conference dates were. I knew it started with an M, and I wasn't sure if it was earlier. And then I know there's a open source leadership conference in March, but I would be interested in having a get together again. I thought that was really constructive.
Maybe
I just want to make sure that if we do it, that we have enough of a breadth of topics. Vish and I, myself, I think he and I can vouch that we had to do like multiple weeks of preparatory work for that face-to-face. That was rather exhausting. So it takes time to coordinate those to be as productive again. So I'm in favor of them, but we just need to make sure that they have enough lead time with a good enough topic space.
I would suggest trying after 110 code freeze. Given there's like holiday in January, and then we'll all be like trying to work towards the 110 code freeze. So maybe like that will be the best period because we can actually plan something for 111, or maybe for KubeCon.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Let's get that on the agenda for next year to nail down. With that, sorry, Harry, for missing your topic, but hopefully you can read the links that I sent you.
Yeah. I noticed that you have updated the proposal. Yeah.
And with that, everyone have a great holiday, and we'll see you all next year.
Mm-hmm.
See you, everyone.